You stand upon the sun-scorched expanse of the Nevada desert. The year is 1876. The blistering sun strikes down mercilessly, like a white-hot hammer, and the air shimmers with heat and a heavy, almost tangible tension. You are a cavalryman in the regiment of a legendary frontier commander, hardened by a dozen skirmishes, confident in your own strength and in your brothers in arms. Suddenly, you notice them, first as a shimmering white line on the horizon, flickering in the haze of the radiated heat, clad in dust dusters of bleached white canvas, each coat marked with a stark blood-red cross on the chest. They move across the scrubland in flawless formation. It is as if not human will, but some supernatural force guides them. The ground beneath your feet begins to tremble rhythmically from the heavy tread of iron-shod warhorses. Your commanding officer shouts orders, but you hear a tremor in his voice. That tremor tells you more than any words. Because everyone present, from the greenest private to the most grizzled sergeant, knows what is about to happen. These Templars of the Plains did not come for negotiations, and will not wait for terms. They have not arrived to display power or intimidate from afar. They are here to strike swiftly, cohesively, and ruthlessly, and when they begin their rapid charge, the world around you will explode with such concentrated, disciplined violence that for a moment, it will seem as if the very hand of Providence has descended from the heavens to trample you into this cursed earth. This is not a Hollywood Western with stylized, slow-motion scenes and heroic orchestral scores. This is not a romanticized legend of pulp novels. This is the brutal, bloody, deafening reality of facing one of the most formidable military machines in American history. Soldier monks, for whom death in combat was not a tragedy, but an open gate to the kingdom of heaven. Men who woke every morning with the thought that this day might be their last, and that thought did not frighten them. It filled them with a calm, chilling resolve. So why did no sane frontier general of that era want to face a Templar rider on the battlefield? Let us cast aside the romantic myths, forget the Hollywood cliches and conspiracy theories, and examine the cold, mechanistic truth of what turned these men into a nightmare for any adversary. Let us break them down piece by piece, from their origins to their tactics, from their training to their weaponry, from their faith to their financing. The origin of this order was deceptively simple, almost unnoticed. It was the year 1868. The American frontier, a territory reclaimed from chaos only 20 years prior, struggled to hold its positions, surrounded by hostile factions on all sides. Its borders were precarious, garrisons were undermanned, and the stagecoach routes between remote outposts and supply hubs were lethally dangerous. Bands of raiders, lawless outlaws, and desperate drifters roamed these trails like packs of wolves. They lay in wait for settlers and weary travelers who had crossed thousands of miles of wilderness to reach the promise of the West. And often, they did not live to see their destination. The frontier trails literally turned into rivers of blood, and no single militia in the territory could control them all simultaneously. And then appeared a man by the name of Hugh DePayne, a cavalry veteran from the rolling hills of Kentucky with a radical, by the standards of his time, idea. He proposed creating a brotherhood of soldier monks, men who would simultaneously hold vows of a holy life and swear to protect the defenseless traveler with a colt and a saber. Together with 8 like-minded men, according to the Chronicle of the High Plains, there were indeed 9 of them. Hugh took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to the territorial bishop. They swore to live as poor soldiers of the Christ and the frontier, owning nothing of their own, dedicating every hour of their lives to the protection of those making the journey. The territorial governor, impressed by their zeal, granted the brotherhood space in the south wing of an abandoned mission near the Santa Fe Trail. The pioneers were convinced this site sat upon the foundation of an ancient, legendary outpost, and this faith gave the order its name, the Poor Riders of the Christ and the Frontier, or, as the whole nation would come to know them, the Templars. What began as a tiny group of 9 impoverished men without a dime to their names transformed, in just a few decades, into a force that shook the foundations of the entire American West. One key event contributed to this. In 1872, Hugh DePayne went on a tour of the eastern cities, where he secured the support of the most influential religious figure of the era, Brother Bernard of the High Church. It was Bernard who wrote a tract in praise of this new chivalry, which transformed the Templars from an unknown handful of fighters into the spiritual ideal of the entire Christian frontier. But the Templars were something fundamentally new for their time. They were not mercenaries fighting for cold gold. nor were they local militiamen obligated to serve their commander for 40 days a year. They represented the first continuous, professional, strictly organized religious military structure in American history, reporting directly and exclusively to the highest office of the Church. A special decree, issued by the Pope in 1874, freed them from all tax obligations and the jurisdiction of local judges and governors, effectively turning the order into an autonomous entity within the states. The life of a Templar was entirely regulated by a charter, a set of rules so strict that most modern special forces operators would not have lasted a week. Its foundation rested on Benedictine monastic rules, adapted and modified for the conduct of war. Personal property did not exist. There was nothing. Even letters from home essentially belonged to the order. Private conversations with women were forbidden, as was the wearing of bright clothing or any ornamentation on weapons or gear. Even the bridle of a horse had to be strictly modest, no gilded buckles, no stitched patterns, no element that could testify to pride or vanity. The charter contained over 600 clauses, regulating literally every moment of a brother's life. Rules determined the number of dishes served at a meal. Usually there were 2. Meat was allowed only 3 times a week. The trimming of hair, the manner of speech, and even the order of mounting a horse were strictly regimented. Their daily schedule functioned with the precision of a pocket watch. Only instead of gears, it used prayers and steel blades. Rising before dawn, while the sky was completely dark, then followed the canonical hours, interspersed with weapons drills and the meticulous care of equipment and mounts. Silent meals, during which Holy Scripture was read aloud, and the only sounds, besides the monotonous voice of the reader, a rider who broke formation in the heat of battle, and such things happened, for they remained human who rushed forward for personal glory, could be stripped of his white duster before the entire brotherhood. This was considered the greatest disgrace, heavier than any physical punishment. To be branded as someone who placed their own self above the sacred mission of the order, the guilty could be demoted to a stable hand, sent to manual labor, or even banished. The latter meant the total loss of everything: brotherhood, purpose, the meaning of existence. In combat, the Templars moved in dense, automated formations, reacting instantly to visual signals of banners and the sounds of bugles. No rider was permitted to act alone. This was not a manifestation of cowardice, but a key principle of their tactics. Discipline always, and under any circumstances, prevailed over individual valor. And it was this cohesion, this ability to act as a single unit, that transformed them into a destructive force before which armies outnumbering them tenfold would retreat. During sieges and the frontier wars were an era of endless sieges. The Templars held the gates and sections of the walls until reinforcements arrived, or until they fell dead at their posts. If the rugged terrain made mounted charges impossible, they would, without hesitation, dismount and join the fight as heavy infantry. Their large, kite-shaped shields formed a dense iron wall capable of withstanding the assault of a significantly superior enemy. This tactic resembled a Roman tortoise, but was adapted to the realities of the 19th century. From the moment a recruit, whether a young man from a noble family or an experienced veteran who decided to dedicate his life to the order, pronounced his vows, he ceased to be an ordinary soldier. He was literally reforged, just as an iron billet is forged into a blade, forming something more durable, sharper, and immeasurably more dangerous. This process took months of ruthless, exhausting training that drained all strength from a person: physical, mental, and spiritual. Recruits were forced to fight in full gear, weighing between 50 and 70 pounds, until the concept of fatigue lost all meaning for them. They learned to control their war horses, specially bred for combat in the chaos of a real skirmish, amidst shouting, clanking metal, and smoke. They trained to maintain formation in total silence while arrows whistled overhead, simulating enemy fire. And anyone who flinched or raised a shield before the command was given received a harsh reprimand. The training was specifically designed to recreate the chaos of real battle in all its unpredictable manifestations. Sudden bugle calls, requiring instantaneous tactical regrouping, feigned retreats, a favorite tactic of the local desert raiding parties, designed to check if any of the riders would break discipline and rush into a trap. Fast dismounting to practice the defense of breached fortresses, when in seconds one must transition from a mounted wedge into a foot phalanx. But the hardening was not only physical. That was only half the formula. The daily study of sacred texts and multi-hour prayers formed the Templar spirit with the same tireless precision with which combat drills strengthened their bodies. The Templars lived by an iron faith, absolutely convinced that they were fulfilling a divine destiny, that every movement of their blade was pleasing to the Almighty, and that death in battle was not an end, but merely a door to eternal life. Their goal was to create a warrior who would obey without question, fight without fear, and accept death without hesitation. The mastery of weapons was constant, monotonous, yet incredibly effective. Striking with a lance was practiced on a special training rig called a quintain, a rotating target to which a sack of sand was attached. This sack would strike the rider across the back if he was slow after the impact. Slashing and thrusting movements with the saber were repeated literally thousands of times, until every action was converted into pure muscle memory, performed without conscious control. Even sleep was an integral part of military training. The Templars rested without removing their clothing, shirts, and trousers by the light of a candle in the dormitory, always ready in an instant to grab their weapons and run out at the alarm, whether by day or night, winter or summer, year after year. In their understanding, the boundary between labor and rest did not exist. Their entire life was service, and the only true rest was considered prayer. Imagine trying to fall asleep in chainmail, knowing that at any moment a bugle will sound, and you must be standing in formation a minute later, sword in hand. Thus, every night, for many long years, in battle, the Templars were true embodiments of a destructive force. And this was not just glory. In mounted combat, their key weapon was a heavy cavalry lance, reaching 10 to 12 feet in length, firmly tucked under the arm for maximum impact force. A single, well-coordinated charge in a wedge, executed in perfect formation at a full gallop, could pierce enemy ranks through and through, turning an organized army into a chaotic crowd gripped by terror. The energy of a heavy rider's impact on a warhorse weighing over half a ton was so great that the lance could pierce chainmail, a shield, and the rider behind them in one powerful motion. After this, the lance usually broke. The Templars would immediately switch to sabers, maces, warhammers, or hatchets, depending on the requirements of the situation. They were taught to handle each type of weapon with equal confidence, so that the loss of one never meant a loss of combat capability. Such versatility made them formidable opponents in any condition, from a mounted skirmish on an open plain to a hand-to-hand fight in the narrow corridors of a besieged fort. Now let us speak of the armor, for it was this that turned a man into a mobile fortress. The basis of protection was the hauberk, a long chainmail shirt woven from thousands of tiny iron rings, each of which was riveted or welded. It covered the body from shoulders to knees and weighed between 25 and 35 pounds. A mail coif was worn on the head, protecting the skull, neck, and chin from slashing blows. On the legs were worn chausses, flexible chainmail stockings secured over a thick, quilted lining. Under all this metal, the Templars wore a gambeson, a quilted jacket of several layers of linen or wool, stuffed with hemp, horsehair, or even old rags. This seemingly simple item performed two critically important functions. It absorbed the energy of blows that passed through the mail, and it prevented the agonizing chafing of the skin. During long hours of continuous movement in metal armor without a gambeson, the mail would be practically unusable. It would bite into the skin, leaving bloody sores within a couple of hours of marching. Over time, with the development of military technology, the Templars began to add plate reinforcements on the knees, elbows, and shins, gradually transitioning from purely mail protection to mixed sets, which became the basis of late 19th century military equipment. The crown of all this defensive gear was the top helm, the famous pot helmet with a flat top, completely covering the head. It provided excellent protection against blows from any direction, but at the cost of monstrous discomfort, restricted breathing, and limited vision through narrow, cross-shaped slits for the eyes. Just imagine. You are fighting for hours in the blistering heat of the desert, where the temperature in the shade reaches 115 degrees. And on your head is a steel pot that traps every breath you take, turning the space inside into a scorching steam bath. Your field of vision is limited to two narrow slits, and you have to rotate your entire head to see what is happening to your sides. It is no wonder their daily prayers were so diligent. In such conditions, help from above was by no means superfluous. The shields of the Templars, large triangular kites with a red cross on a white background, performed a dual function: physical protection and powerful psychological warfare. The wall of Templars, advancing in a closed formation with locked shields, bore down on the enemy like a living, armored barrier. Their appearance was capable of undermining the morale of the defenders even before weapons were used. Chroniclers on both sides noted that often, the mere appearance of Templar banners on the horizon caused panic among experienced fighters. During sieges, the Templars were not limited to fast cavalry raids. They were masters of the crossbow, although it was considered a non-knightly weapon, a fact that the pragmatic Templars ignored. They would drive spears into the ground to repel infantry attacks, creating barriers of sharp points. With staggering, almost mechanical precision, they operated siege machinery from trebuchets capable of hurling boulders weighing up to 200 pounds to ballistae and mangonels for nothing, testifies so eloquently to sacred devotion as the launch of a 100-pound boulder over the wall of an enemy fort in the name of the Lord. The Templars did not just prepare for war. They lived it, breathed it, and were permeated by it to the depths of their souls. Every moment of their existence was subject to one goal: to be constantly ready for battle and to fight in such a way that their mere appearance would make the enemy doubt the correctness of their life choices. Their combat glory was born on the 25th of November 1177, at the Battle of the Ridge. And this birth was so bright that the reflection of that day illuminated the reputation of the order for a century. The situation was, frankly, hopeless. The frontier King Baldwin, a young man under 20 suffering from leprosy, his body literally rotting away, had an army of only a few hundred riders and a couple of thousand infantry. Facing him stood a massive army of the great Salah ad-Din. By various estimates, from 20,000 to 30,000 warriors. Heading toward the unprotected frontier capital, Salah ad-Din was so confident in victory that he allowed his forces to stretch out along the path, disperse, and lower their vigilance. This became the mistake that shook his reputation as an invincible commander. Baldwin, despite the disease that had deprived him of his fingers and disfigured his face, personally led the attack, carrying a fragment of the true cross, the greatest relic of the Crusaders, in front of the army. In the vanguard of the army stood the Templars, about 1,000 riders of the order under the command of the Grand Master Odo de Santamand. The attack was executed with that surgical precision which became the calling card of the Templars. The armored warhorses, each weighing over half a ton, charged at a full gallop. The lances aligned into a single line of death. The strike hit directly at the heart of Salah ad-Din's army, piercing his ranks like a hot knife through butter, and in a matter of minutes, it turned a formidable army into a fleeing crowd. Panic spread instantly, and inevitably. Salah ad-Din himself, the greatest commander of the era, whose name struck terror across the entire territory, escaped death only by a miracle, fleeing on a camel accompanied by a negligible group of bodyguards. His personal guard of elite Mamluks was almost completely destroyed. The camp was looted, and the banner captured. This defeat so shocked the world that it took Salah ad-Din nearly 10 years to fully restore his forces and reputation. A handful of pious monks, led by a leprous youth, put the most powerful army in the Middle East to flight. Is that not the best testament to the strength of the military order? But history is a harsh teacher, and after a triumph, payment inevitably follows. 10 years later, on the 4th of July 1187, came the day that forever changed the fate of the frontier. The Battle of the Basin. Salah ad-Din had learned the lessons of the Ridge, and this time he acted as a brilliant strategist. With devilish calculation, he chose the place and time, luring the united army of the frontier, including the elite of the Templar Order, into the waterless, scorched hills to the west of the Great Lake. The trap was flawless. The blistering July sun, the absence of water for many miles around, the scorching rocky earth that burned the soles of feet even through leather boots, and not a single path for retreat. Salah ad-Din ordered the dry brush on the slopes to be set ablaze, and acrid smoke enveloped the frontier forces, depriving them of what little air they had. Men were falling from heatstroke and dehydration even before the enemy attack began. Notably, the Templars held formation longer than anyone. Even when the army around them scattered, when the infantry threw down their weapons and begged for mercy, the Knights of the Order continued to fight. However, even their legendary discipline could not overcome the laws of physics. A dehydrated body fails, no matter how strong the will may be. The frontier army was completely routed. It was the most catastrophic defeat in the history of the crusading states. About 230 Templars and Hospitallers were taken prisoner, and Salah ad-Din made a decision that speaks of the Templars more than any chronicle. He ordered them all executed, giving each a choice: accept the new faith or accept death. According to the account of the Arab chronicler, Imad ad-Din, Every captured Templar, without the slightest hesitation, chose death. Salah ad-Din, according to the accounts of chroniclers, immensely respected their valor. Although he considered the Templars the greatest threat among all the Westerners, that is precisely why he could not allow their survival. Warriors immune to the fear of death and who did not know defeat were too dangerous, even as prisoners. The execution of the captives was entrusted to the mystics and scholars in his circle. There were no professional executioners among them, and eyewitnesses described numerous, clumsy, and agonizing blows. Nevertheless, not a single Templar begged for mercy. If it was fated to perish, then one should do so with such unbending persistence that even the victor was forced to admit, "You were the most formidable opponent I have ever encountered." The defeat at the basin had truly colossal consequences. Less than 3 months later, on the 2nd of October 1187, the sacred city, for the sake of which the frontiermen had come to these lands, fell to Salah ad-Din. The surviving Templars fought heroically on the walls to the last, maintaining the morale of the garrison and covering gaps with their own bodies. But the forces were incomparable. Those who could pay the ransom, $10 for a man, 5 for a woman, 1 for a child, were let go. Thousands of the destitute were sold into slavery. However, the loss of the city did not break the Templars. It transformed them. From that moment, they ceased to be merely guardians of the holy city. Every breath they took, every strike of their sword, every prayer was now subordinated to a single goal: to return it. The fall of the city became not the end of their mission, but its agonizing rebirth. From guards, they turned into avengers, and this metamorphosis made them even more dangerous, desperate, and unwavering. The next test was the siege of the coastal stronghold, a brutal, exhausting 2-year battle lasting from 1189 to 1191. This operation represented one of the most large-scale military campaigns of the entire era of the frontier wars, involving tens of thousands of warriors on both sides in an endless series of assaults, counterattacks, and epidemics. Diseases such as dysentery, malaria, and scurvy claimed no fewer lives than swords and arrows. The summer heat was unbearable, and the winter downpours turned the camp into a foul-smelling swamp. The Templars were in the very epicenter of events. They repelled night sorties by the garrison, were the first to go on the assault of the walls, and hauled siege towers under a continuous rain of arrows and streams of boiling oil. Imagine 2 summers and 2 winters in a row under the open sky, knee-deep in mud, with rotting water, surrounded by the dead and dying, and every day you must be ready for battle. As if you had just arrived full of strength, the city eventually fell thanks to the arrival of the great monarchs of the East, but the Templars paid for this victory with hundreds of lives. And then, on September 7 of that same 1191, came the moment that became, perhaps, the highest demonstration of Templar discipline in the history of the order: the Battle of the Coast. The army of the frontier king was moving along the coast, and Salah ad-Din was incessantly attacking its flanks and rearguard with his light cavalry. Thousands of mounted archers circled around the column, showering it with arrows. The tactic was simple and effective: provoke the frontiermen into a premature counterattack, and then, when their formation shattered, destroy them piece by piece. The Templars, who made up the rearguard, the most vulnerable and dangerous part of the column, held their formation under this murderous fire for several agonizing hours. Arrows thinned their shields, the bodies of their horses, and the unprotected parts of their armor. Wounded horses wheezed and fell. Brother knights died one after another, but the line did not falter. Not a single Templar went into a counterattack without orders. They waited, suffered, and died in formation, but they did not break it. And when finally the 6 bugle calls sounded the agreed-upon signal from the king, and the banners were lowered, the Templars fell upon Salah ad-Din's cavalry with such crushing fury, accumulated over hours of waiting, that his forces were scattered in total disarray. The counterattack was so powerful that the opposing army could not regroup for the rest of the day. The coast was not a strategically decisive victory, but it proved something important. The Templars could endure for hours what would have broken any other army, and deliver a fatal blow exactly when the enemy was certain of their victory. Then there was the Delta campaign, a key fortress that the frontiersmen besieged from 1218 to 1219. The conditions were horrifying, even by the standards of that era. Floods turned the camp into an impassable swamp. Tropical heat and humidity provoked epidemics of malaria, dysentery, and plague, which thinned the ranks of the crusading army faster than enemy swords. Swarms of mosquitoes were so dense that people could not sleep, and every bite could lead to a deadly fever. Nevertheless, the Templars were again in the vanguard. They were the first to scale the walls, the first to break through, and they held the breach until the main forces arrived. The city fell, and although in the end the entire campaign turned into an inglorious failure, the Templars once again demonstrated their ability to survive and emerge victorious in conditions fatal to any ordinary army. They could survive knee-deep in swamp water, surrounded by malarial mosquitoes and plague outbreaks, and still successfully storm the most fortified gates. However, a truly black day came for the Order on the 17th of October, 1244. In the battle near the Great Gorge, the Templars, Hospitallers, and their allies encountered a massive coalition army of the local sultan and bands of nomadic mercenaries. The nomads, nomadic warriors displaced by a great migration from the far north, were desperate cutthroats who had nothing to lose and therefore fought with the fury of the doomed. The Templars, as was predictable, took the most dangerous position, the front line, and refused to retreat a single step. From dawn until noon, they held back continuous waves of attacks, bleeding, but providing their allies time to regroup or withdraw. By sunset, their formation was finally breached. The losses were catastrophic. Out of about 348 Templars who went onto the field of battle, only 36 remained alive. In one day, the Order lost over 90% of its strength. This was a wound from which the Order recovered for many years. Nevertheless, they recovered. They recruited new riders, erected destroyed forts, and refilled the treasury. Giving up the frontier territory was as unthinkable to a Templar as giving up breathing. Nothing testifies to such devotion to one's mission as losing almost everything and returning to start again. They returned again and again, like a tide that cannot be stopped by any wall. Their final battle, perhaps the most tragically majestic page in the history of the Order, played out in the coastal capital in 1291. The Sultan collected a massive army, by some accounts up to 200,000 warriors, including tens of thousands of engineers and siege specialists, and moved it to the walls of the last major stronghold of the frontier men. The siege began in April, and from the first day, it was obvious that this would be a fight to the death. The Sultan's forces dragged more than 100 siege machines to the walls, which day and night showered the city with stone blocks. The Templars fought with the desperation of people who realized they had nowhere to retreat. Behind them was only the sea. They fought for every street, for every house, for every room, turning every alley into a death trap for the attackers. The Grand Master of the Order, an experienced warrior and diplomat, fought in the front ranks and was mortally wounded by an arrow that pierced his armor under his left arm. According to the Chronicle of the Templar, when his comrades tried to evacuate him from the battlefield, he uttered the immortal words, "I do not flee, I am dead. See, the wounds are here." The surviving Templars retreated to their fortress by the sea, a massive tower that became the last pocket of resistance. They barricaded themselves inside and held out for a few more days, repelling one attack after another. On May 28, the enemy undertook a final assault, and by some accounts, the tower collapsed from mining, burying under the ruins both the last defenders and hundreds of attackers. With the fall of that tower, the frontier men lost their last significant stronghold. The surviving Templars evacuated to an island offshore. The nearly two-century mission of the Order in the East was finally interrupted. But their legend, as often happens, was only beginning. However, the Templars were not only warriors, and it was this fact that made them a truly unique phenomenon in the American frontier world. They created a financial empire, the scale and sophistication of which amazed contemporaries and anticipated institutions known to us today as the banking system. Governors and presidents stored their wealth in impenetrable Templar vaults. The main bank of the Order in the eastern cities functioned as a state treasury for over 100 years. Merchants and travelers, setting out on long journeys, could deposit money at one Templar station, receive a coded receipt, and cash it at another located 1,000 miles away, a sort of prototype of a bank transfer and traveler's check, invented 7 centuries before their official appearance. Rulers borrowed colossal sums from the Order to finance wars, build forts, and pay ransoms, often from the very same knights who subsequently fought side by side with them in those campaigns. At the same time, individual brother knights continued to live in strict poverty. Their vows strictly required this, but the Order itself, as an institution, controlled landholdings, forts, farms, vineyards, and mills on a scale comparable to the largest states of the Union. By the time of its zenith, the Order of Templars possessed more than 9,000 commanderies, stretching from the far north to the southern islands. Nothing worried the monarchs of that time more than the existence of such a militant brotherhood of monks, which demonstrated far greater skill in handling weapons and in managing finances than they themselves and their entire royal court combined. The Templars answered only to the authority of the Pope, ignoring the dictates of governors, generals, and local church hierarchs. This absolute autonomy, confirmed by papal decrees, ensured them both invincibility on the battlefield and immunity in political intrigues. For their allies, they were the cornerstone of any military campaign, the last line of defense that did not retreat, and the first offensive wedge that broke the enemy's defensive ranks. For their enemies, they symbolized something else, a force transcending ordinary military calculations, representing disciplined, virtuoso, and fanatically devoted fighters whom it was impossible to seduce, intimidate, or break by any means other than total physical destruction. It was precisely this combination of military might, financial influence, and political independence that eventually led to the tragedy of the order. On Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, a day that, according to one version, gave birth to the superstition about Black Friday, a French-style monarch launched his strike. The ruler owed the order vast sums of money he neither wished nor could return, and he also saw the Templars as a threat to his own absolute power. By his personal order, in one day across the land, nearly all the Templars, about 2,000 people, were seized. They were presented with monstrous accusations: renunciation of Christ, worship of idols, sodomy, and the deification of some mysterious Baphomet. Under sophisticated and ruthless torture, many confessed to deeds they had never committed. The Grand Master, the last of the heads of the order, initially admitted his guilt, but then retracted his testimony, and on the 18th of March, 1314, was burned alive on an island in the middle of the river. Legend has it that from the embrace of the flames, he cursed the king and the pope, predicting their imminent demise, and indeed, both passed away within that same year, which contributed to the emergence of one of the most popular legends of the American frontier era. Their white robes perhaps turned to ashes more than 7 centuries ago. Their forts turned into ruins. The commanderies became museums and hotels, and their treasures, if such existed at all, were never found, giving birth to countless conspiracy theories and adventure novels. But the memory of their essence and significance still shines in history brighter than that flame. They were the ones who stood to the end when everyone else fled. The ones who moved forward when everything seemed irretrievably lost. The ones who made discipline a weapon as destructive as any blade, and faith in armor more durable than any steel. And it is precisely this, not legends of hidden riches, not myths of secret mysteries, but this unwavering, terrifying, almost superhuman resolve that is the true reason why, in the world of the 19th century frontier, no one wanted to meet a Templar rider on the battlefield. A fairly impressive story for a modest group of guys who started their journey as 9 men on the dusty trails of the West.